So, good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to join our session today on carbon, biodiversity, product and environment footprinting, and what does it mean in terms of public policy. So, our topic today is about the mismatch between public policy and business goals. And we'll have Mr. LCA, as we call it, Mr. Hans Blonk today, to tell us all about different concepts, different tools, and what might be the future means for the agri-food sector. To introduce, my name is Tiffany Chui. I'm your moderator of today's session. I'm a global strategist, consultant, and entrepreneur. I, together with Dick Veerman at Foodlock, we initiated this digital food series. I'm also the co-owner of Vertical Farm Institute, which focusing on develop sustainable ultra short chain for cities. So starting at the beginning of 2020, in the midst of Corona, the digital food series was developed with a theme to connect data, technology, and strategy, and to connect people, ideas, and regions. The key question we try to answer is what is needed to create trust among connected players in the agri-food system? And how do we define value allocation models for providing data, transforming them, and applying information throughout the entirety of the food chain? So today's session is the fourth one in this year's session, focusing on business cases. Before this, we had a number of cases looking at, for example, Port of Amsterdam, how they are developing digital dashboard and due diligence to understand to what is going on for the goods passing through the port. And last time, we had the Leon Mols, Global Director for Ahold Delhaize, looking at how a global or multinational supermarket chain is working on to manage the risk for the 100,000 products in the entire product category. And all that comes down to a key topic is measuring of data and measuring of risk, and using the data and standards to inform reputation management, risk management. There are still a lot of challenges from the past talks. So today, our session will focus on very specific of tools and methodologies to help business to understand the different kind of impact. So to start, Bianca, who's our manager at Foodlock, part of digital food team, she will be also helping us with the poll questions. Let's run the first poll question. So the first question, we have, by the way, thank you very much for today's registration. We have a really great participant from very different businesses and chains. So the question is, do you use any of these tools, analysis, reporting mechanisms in your product category or your chains or your business? You can answer all three, all carbon footprinting, the environmental footprinting, or product footprinting, or biodiversity footprinting, or none. You have not heard of it. You don't know, have no concern to your business. So I would like to see the answer when you are done. So we can also like to ask comments from our participant of your experience. So Bianca, finished already? Okay, so we have, let's say 70% of our participants today all have some degree of experience with all the three tools, 17% even all three, 33% none. So let's start with a none. Can you, let's have a show of hands maybe? Who answered none in this, and then would like to tell us why do you haven't used any? Anybody? Can we have a show of hands? Who answered none in this in the poll question? You can just press on the reaction, right? Raising hands. Can we have a raised hand? Or you don't want to tell why you didn't answer no? Please, volunteers. Okay. All right. Well, let's start with one then. Who answered you have used one tool, one of the three tools? A show of hands, please. We have 28%. Please. Evert, please turn on your speaker. Yes, welcome. Can you tell us which tool have you used and why? So which business are you in?
Yeah, we are DNO, technical solution company. So we deliver technical solutions or concepts, and we use environmental footprinting.
Okay.
For our company.
Environmental footprinting, and what kind of product specifically?
I don't know.
Anything. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks.
But I know that we use it environmental, so we look how we can reduce environmental waste.
Are you looking into the other two types of calculation also?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay. Great, thanks. So we can hear about the differences or development on this area. So Hans, this is also in line with your understanding based on the last 20 years of footprinting and the tool development? Does this represent more or less the market kind of a picture that is still, let's say, 30% of the company are doing it, most of the company are doing something, but some are even doing three?
Yeah, I think what you should say about this basically, what we notice, you can see this also from the positive side. So already nearly 20% of the attendees are involved in the three ways of footprinting, which is quite a lot basically, because if you would have asked this question 5 years ago, I would have been glad if it would have been 20% of only doing one type of footprinting.
Okay.
So that's let's say the positive approach. A little bit more negatively, it would be that still 33% of the people or businesses are not doing this. But my experience is that basically nearly all companies are really are getting involved in the coming years, basically. So especially the bigger ones in the food sector, they basically have to. I think it's not possible that we have this same meeting in 2 years and that there is 33% of none, basically. That's my
Great.
idea.
So that's the goal. I think that's also the ambition, indeed, to continuous monitoring the market, to say, well, then we have at least 30% of the market need to speed up in the next 3 years. So in the beginning, I introduced you as Mr. LCA of the Netherlands, understand? So maybe you can start us to tell us about how Blonk Consultant came into existence with your leadership, and also indeed what has changed, what you have seen in the market in the last 20 years.
Yeah, fine. Thank you, Tiffany. I'm going to share my screen because I prepared something on that. Do you see my screen already?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so a brief, do you see also, do you see the complete screen, or I see also, let's say, the attendees, but you don't see that?
No.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Thank you. So brief introduction of myself, only a few slides, and then we go more into the content later on. Where do I come from? Yeah, I'm a biologist. I ended my study 30-something years ago, studied in Leiden, and basically being a biologist means for me also having this interest in and curiosity about how living systems work, basically. If you think a little bit further on this, then basically living systems and biological systems are the essence of feeding the world, the essence of agro production and basically our life support system. So it is essential. And that during my study also got this orientation into environmental sciences, which was really at the start at that time. Also, LCA really came up during that time, and I was also involved in the development of the LCA methodology in the Netherlands at that time. But always having this orientation in living systems, in agri-food systems, and also knowing that and that was also my motivation, that by understanding better how these systems work, you can also make better policies and better production practices, and that is where all my company is about understanding the economic systems better and how these economic systems interrelate with the biological systems we live in and we live upon, basically. And the core methodology used for that is basically life cycle assessment. I will explain it a bit later on. But for me, it's really, and that is my big mission, and is to help others also to understand, to learn with me, with my company, everything that we learn about how biological systems can feed the world and how we interact and how we, with these biological systems, also in terms of waste that we bring in and emissions that we bring into the system again. So you have this production, and you have basically the system as dealing with our waste flows and emissions again. So that's my basic motivation. And now we're coming to more the company presentation, and of course you have this vision and mission, and the vision is indeed about inspiration and about guidance, basically, and also about empowerment. So really connected to my personal motivation. It's essential to understand the food system and the interactions with the environment, and that's where Blonk is about. How do we do that? And is that we try to create actionable insights. Fact-based, science-based. So it's about facts and figures. It's about tailored tools that our customers can use to monitor their impact and also to see how they can improve their impact. And we're also really involved in the definition on how to calculate impacts, how to calculate the interactions you have with the environment, and how you can report on that and being transparent on that, and how you can see how you can improve. So that's everything the company is about. Then the company, it basically exists of two main units. So we have the consultancy, and consultancy is about the questions that our customers can have, and our main customers are food businesses, basically, or agri businesses, or suppliers of farms, everything around farming, basically. And they have a lot of questions about where do we stand? What is my baseline? What is my baseline impact? My customer is asking for this. I need to know this, and I need to communicate this, but also the question on I need to improve, I want to improve, and how can I do this? So this is all related to our consultancy activities. And then we have the other part of the company, which is now growing quite fast, actually, and that is really about the data that you need to do the assessments, the data that you need to get the understanding, and the tools that you need to do the calculations in an efficient way. So that's all we do at Blonk Sustainability Tools. So we have the unit Blonk Consultants and the unit Blonk Sustainability Tools. The total company is around 40 persons at the moment. And yeah, the main sectors we are working for are basically are not the farmers themselves, although we can develop tools that they can use, but it's mostly the parties around the farms that we work for. So there's a group of suppliers like fertilizer companies or feed additive companies or feed producers or producers of housing systems or robotica or whatever that is needed for modern farming, basically, and which are also the technologies that can improve farming. So we work a lot with suppliers of farms. We also work with the let's say primary producers of primary processors of the farm products. So those are the companies that make out of wheat, wheat starch and wheat gluten feed, or from soybeans, soybean oil and soybean meal, or from dairy, a whole range of dairy products, basically. So these farm commodity producers are also an important customer for us, because they, both the suppliers of the farmers and the farm commodity producers, are also really active in having this understanding of the environmental impact of the farms, and also trying to improve this impact. And they have a very strong focus there, because if you look at the environmental impact of food systems, the majority of the impact is also located at farms. So if you want to improve food systems, you have to improve farming, basically. And that's why these companies also have a big attention there. Then there are, of course, the Unilevers and the really the producers of food products. They become now also more and more active. They have set targets for the medium and long term on how and to reduce climate impact, and also to reduce other environmental impacts, and they have to realize that. And so now, and that's more the latest development, really from the past years, that also retail and food service is setting these targets for the supply chain. So what we see is basically a growing attention, getting more and more attention further on in the value chain. So was it first really the parties around farming? Now it's more also moving to the producers of food products, but also retail and food service. And then there is, let's say, a whole tech world around farms and in the food value chain, which are also customers of us, because they bring the technologies to the value chain and to farmers to measure impact. And we cooperate a lot with them, because they have the data management systems they provide to farms. And then we add basically the environmental footprint calculations to these data management systems, or a feed optimization tool, or whatever systems that are used. We have to load these systems with the environmental footprint information. So those are the main sectors we work for. And I think, yeah, that's my story about me and the company. Basically, the company is growing really fast at the moment, and that also is, let's say, an indicator about the growing attention on environmental footprinting.
Okay, thanks, Hans. So before you move into the next part on exactly what are we measuring and how to measure them, let's get back to our participant again. I would like to ask a show of hands, that earlier the ones the 17% of company who answered you're doing all three. Can you volunteer, raise your hand and tell us, who are you and why are you using these systems? I'll give a little moment for hands. While we're waiting, I'd like to then maybe ask Frans Kuipers. He already responded with he is from Ethiopia producing roses, and they know Blonk, maybe using your servers already. Frans, would you like to share with us what are you doing with the different kind of environmental impact analysis?
Yes, I will try. You can see me of what we spoke about. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We are from Sierra Flora, and we have a rose produce nursery in CY, and we produce every day 4 million roses. Every retailer in Europe is our client, and we use the system of PRAY already now for 2 or 3 years, and we are also member of, we use One Carbon World to neutralize our CO2 footprint to 0 till the time that we have. But we are looking for more assets in Ethiopia, how we can reduce CO2 there.
Okay.
And Hans Blonk know everything about that because he's also a member, I don't know, FSI, Floriculture Sustainable Initiative in the Netherlands.
Okay.
And perhaps one of the contractors of signatures of the EMVO Covenant in the Netherlands to promise that every grower in the world who used the flower auction in Aalsmeer has a plan to reduce CO2.
Okay, that's thanks for sharing this very nice use case. So you are using essentially to measure carbon, right? Understand?
Yes.
So not the biodiversity or other environment, really focusing on carbon.
Yeah, for sure, all the environment also.
Okay.
We are using no pesticides. We are total biological. And we recycled all the water what is used in Ethiopia. So we do everything what the retailers ask it, because we have to sell 1 billion roses a year, and so we need our customers. But as producers, we cannot solve the problem. We need the retailers, and so I'm happy that a lot of retailers are here now, so they can distribute us to buy our flowers. CO2 neutral.
Yes, great. So that's the case. What Hans just said, that the driver is coming from the retailer, so they pass down, let's say, the requirement for suppliers to provide a proof, basically, that you are doing well in your supply chain, in your own. So, but what I understand, your question is that for the, let's say, the what's happening outside your own business. So how do you help in the wider context, right? Is that your question?
For me, you ask me?
Yes, because you answered the question earlier to say.
Yeah, for sure. Everyone is looking to the producers, but the producers can a lot to do. But at the end of the day, if you buy roses for 3.50 in the supermarket instead of 3 euro, then you are carbonate neutral.
Yeah.
And that is the end of the stories, and you can never reach the goals. I listen also to Albertijn Deleuze. I can lay on all very good, but to come in the business from the retail, yeah, they say we can only communicate what has happened. We cannot pay you more. That's the problem. So I hope that the retailers who are listening today, they agree that they are a part of the solution.
Thanks. I think that's exactly at the core. You're not actually the questions and case from France has touched on several, let's say, the complexities in measuring impact. What is the boundary? Is it only within the control of the producer, or also the bigger, let's say, the other scope, bigger context where you need more players to work together? Who pays for it? And then which standard probably. So Hans, maybe you can share some light on these questions with also your presentation, the next chapter.
Yeah, I will do, but the question that remains basically is indeed the pricing of sustainable products, basically, and that's an interesting one. I'm not going to answer that one. But I think there will be more and more examples where some incentives are created also for producers. I always think Friesland Campina does well with the Planet Proof initiative, where they pay additional to the farmers if they perform according to certain standards. But yeah, that it should be a much, let's say, broader principle in the complete supply chain. But yeah, I first go into a little bit more detail on the measuring impacts and what it is about. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, later on in the discussion, we can come back on that. Okay, what is it about? So here you see the food value chain, going from left to right, basically. And in this food value chain, of course, everything's or most, yeah. From a biological viewpoint, all production starts basically with photosynthesis and starts with organisms, mostly plants, that can create a biomass from energy. So that's where everything starts. If then we have this cultivation and the quite essential next step, and that's basically the first processing step to commodities. And I gave already some examples: crushing the soybeans to oil and meal, oil going to a lot of different applications, meal going through to animal feed. But basically you see this, there are maybe 7, 8, 9 basic processes of plant-based material that process most of the crops worldwide into several co-products. Co-products that where the main product can go into the food production, further food production process. The co-products can go again in the food production process when they feed animals or fungi or bioreactors, or they can also go into other applications. Of course, you have also the fuels and the materials. I didn't show this on the screen, but this is basically big industries, relatively homogeneous processing, creating a range of main commodities. And then you go into a next step, that's basically refining of these commodities to ingredients. And then in the food industry, it's basically all, if it's about consumer products, it's basically about mixing of ingredients. So the previous steps created the ingredients, and then you have a recipe to create your food product. And then there can be this in-between step even to make premixes. So if you really look at the end producers of food products, there are quite some steps in between to actually cultivation to that you make a bread. So the bread, here you have the wheat, here is the wheat meal, here is the further refinement. Here can it be mixed to a mix that is put a ready-to-use bread mix, basically, and here it goes into an industrial bakery. Then it goes into retail and wholesale or food service, and then to the end user. Now, what are the points of leverage in these systems? Basically, where can you really make a change in the impact of the system? There are basically three places. The first one is to improve cultivation practices. So do that, create the same outputs with less inputs, with less impact on the environment in a sustainable way. Then at the end, of course, you have the user. So we can change our diets in many ways so that the demand from this system reduces, and also the impacts of the system reduces, because we then and we can also reduce wastage in the system. And a lot of the wastage in the Western countries is at this side of the system. A lot of the wastage in less developed countries is at this side of the system. And then there is the question, of course, of how do we convert from let's say the baseline cultivated crops to what we actually eat. Do we include animal production or not? Or do we include alternative production there, like fungi-based production systems or bioreactor products? So you can, which are basically the same systems as animal systems, but then from a biological viewpoint. So they convert energy in the crops to another type of energy and proteins and nutrients that people can eat, basically. So it's about how do we cultivate, how do we eat, basically, and how do we convert in the system. The main, if you look from environmental perspective, the main impacts are basically related to land use, land conversion, and the sustainability of this land use. So systems that have a high need of land perform worse than systems that have a lower need of land. But at the same time, it's also important to look at the quality of the land that you use, the land that you have in cultivation. So also you can have, let's say, quite high yielding production systems, which are also not so sustainable because they cause a lot of pollution, or they are degrading the land, or whatever. So it's not always about maximization. It's quite often about optimization. Another very important impact of basically our agri-production systems is water depletion, and then of course greenhouse gas emissions. Food systems contribute around 20-25% globally to greenhouse gas emissions. But the food systems, the contribution to the other topics like land conversion and non-sustainable land use and water depletion is much higher than this 25%. We tend to lose this, have this not in perspective quite often because we are so focused on greenhouse gas emissions. But agri-food systems create quite some other impact and also impact that is quite essential for the sustainability of the global ecosystems. And then, of course, you have other emissions that disturb ecosystems and also human health. A little bit more theoretical. So you have all these different types of interventions into the environment, and you have what we call LCA. LCA is life cycle assessment. And with life cycle assessment, you try to estimate the impact over all these stages in the value chain that you take into consideration. And you monitor the emissions and the resource use. And then you are going to translate these emissions and resource use to certain impacts. In LCA, we can distinguish quite some different impacts. So these impacts are called midpoint impact categories. So if you talk about an environmental footprint, that mostly constitutes of multiple impacts. Currently, the European system that is now being developed in the PEFT product environmental footprint distinguishes 16 different impacts. And for carbon emissions, they also make a subdivision in 3 additional impacts, so that you come to around 19 impacts. And then these impacts you can connect to certain endpoints. And the 3 main endpoints are basically damage to human health, damage of ecosystem, and damage to resource availability. And there are certain pathways how you can connect basically the impact categories to the endpoints. If we talk about biodiversity, so you can also focus on the biodiversity footprint. That is actually about this damage, so the damage to ecosystems. And you see that a lot of different impacts basically contribute to the biodiversity impact. If you see what are the main impacts contributing to biodiversity impact, that is on place 1. That's again land use and land use transformation. If you remove a natural area and replace it by area where you cultivate crops, that has a major impact already on biodiversity. Global warming is again important. Water use is important, and disruption of nitrogen and phosphorus flows. They all add up to the damage to ecosystems, the biodiversity loss, basically. Okay, so this seems rather complicated, but the good thing is if you do an LCA, you just have to collect the input data which are at this site. So basically that is then collecting from the company you're looking at and its supply chain or the other stages in the value chain. How much resources did you use? How much energy did you use? What are the emissions? And then there's a model. There are models in place that translate this to these impact categories. So essential is this possibility to model things. Now, if you are going to model life cycle footprints, you have a model that consists of the following components. In the end, you want to calculate something for an amount of output. So that's what we can call a functional unit. So a production system can produce a liter of milk with a certain quality meant to use for a certain purposes. That's what we call a functional unit. And this system is what you take into account is everything that was needed for this liter of milk from the beginning of the production of feed and the production of fertilizers and the production of energy and the production of crop protection and whatever that was needed to come to this liter of milk. So all the steps that I showed before in the previous slide that you need there with all the inputs is taken into account. That falls into the system boundaries, but there are also cutoff rules because you know that certain activities will in the end have not such a big impact on the liter of milk. So by doing a lot of LCAs about this liter of milk in the past, you learn about what matters a lot and what matters less, and you can basically define rules on how to do the calculation of the liter of milk well and in an efficient and transparent and coherent way. This methodology on how to calculate it is basically called a standard. And there are multiple standards available now for doing LCA, do footprinting studies. So there are more generic standards available that tells you about how do I have to do greenhouse gas accounting for products or for companies. There's also a European standard available, the PEFT, Product Environmental Footprint, and an Organizational Environmental Footprint, that tells you in general how to do the footprinting. So what to take into account, how to define functional units, how to go with cutoff rules, what is a generic principle to set a cutoff rule, and what are generic principles to define system boundaries. But if you want to do this more explicitly and very consistent for a certain product group or for a certain sector, you need additional guidelines, more precise guidelines on who to do this for dairy products specifically, or how to do this specifically for beer or whatever products you can think of. So apart from generic rules and generic standards, and there are quite some out there, you need more the sector-specific, product-specific product category rules or sector guidance rules or whatever. Okay, and then about the tools. If you want to measure environmental impact, and this is also related to the standard, what do you need actually for calculating the impact? First, you have to collect primary data of your operation, assuming that you're a producer now let's say you're a dairy farm. So what is then the primary data of your operation? Now that's all about and how much milk did you produce, how much culled cows did you produce. Culled cows are the cows that are leaving the farm for slaughtering, how much calves do you produce. So all about the outputs. And then it's all about the inputs. So how much feed did you use, what was the land that you need for production of roughages, what is the fertilization of the land, and whatever. So everything that's basically about running the business of the farm. That is your primary data. But then you come to the question, yeah, but all the only a limited amount of impact is actually caused at the farm itself. So there are direct emissions, the direct emissions from manure management, or the direct enteric methane emissions from the cow. Or nitrate emissions coming from the land that you have fertilized for growing your maize and growing for your grass, basically. So there are direct emissions at the farm, but also the products that are used for doing the operation at the farm, the products coming from your supply chain, were also produced and were also causing emissions and environmental impacts. So these are the emissions of your supply chain. And your supply chain, you can start asking questions about, okay, I'm doing my environmental assessment. What are the results of your environmental assessment? Quite often the answer is now, we do not know very, very well yet, but we are busy with creating the insight. And if we are ready, we are willing to share the information. But for now, you have to rely still quite a bit on databases with environmental information on the production of fertilizers, production of crop protection, production of soybean meal for the feed of the animal, production of whatever. So secondary databases are quite critical for doing your environmental footprint assessment. And then I said already, quite some emissions are happening at the farm. But how do you calculate these emissions? Most emissions are not measured. Most emissions are modeled. So what you have is the information about how much fertilizer did I use, how much feed did I use, and whatever, how much cows do I have. And then this basic information, the primary data of your operation, is connected to emission models and connected to the secondary data I talked about. And then you have basically you all combine this by, let's say, calculation rules. The impact modeling I showed you before. So this is translating all the emission information to the impact categories I showed you before. And then there are rules about how to record and how to verify and how to report. So this is basically all covered in standards. How to do this is covered in the standard and in a tool that should comply to all the things that are put into the standard, and that should make the environmental footprinting easy and compliant and transparent and so on. The good thing is that these specific standards and specific tools and specific data that you need for doing the assessments are for quite some sectors already developed. So quite some sectors can already do the footprinting, environmental footprinting, carbon footprinting now in a consistent way. And yeah, thank you. And I get some support here from my throat. So that's a good thing, but for quite some other sectors, this still needs to be developed. But yeah, I think with these 3 slides, I have presented some basics about footprinting.
Yes, thanks, Hans. You can take a break in your throat.
Yeah, sorry.
So, as you already mentioned a few times, we started with these 3 concepts: biodiversity, environment, and carbon. They are related, but they also have, different tools and methodologies. And for the 30% of more people who haven't started or looking to start, it sounds maybe daunting in a way where to start. But you also mentioned the good thing is actually the methodology. There is a universal methodology.
Yeah.
It depends on the input. If you have the good database, you have a good input on a wider environment, the methodology is there, the tools is there, the output can be tailored to, if it's more focused on carbon, it's more about diversity. So in that, it's not necessarily a step-by-step approach. You principally are ready, like you say, most sectors are even ready to step towards reporting on a wider array of indicators based on existing tools and methodologies. So hence comes to the poll question, Bianca, to everybody. We don't show the result to the end. Do you think there will be a universal greenhouse gas calculation standard or impact standard for all food sectors in the next 5 years? You can choose your choice here. And in the meantime, we have Petra Logs. If you are still there, Petra. Petra was on our panel earlier. Petra is the global head of sustainability for Syngenta. So today's topic is extremely relevant to Syngenta and to Petra, I think. Petra, if you are happy to, because you also had questions to France relating to a similar question about standard. Is there a minimal standard? Do you lead to better prices? So Syngenta, of course, is a big, let's say, it's the environment for farmers. You provide the fertilizer, you provide the machinery, or not machinery, but then the growing input for farmers. So, and you are, Petra, you're in charge of sustainability. So what do you think when you answer your own question? Should there be a minimum standard for everybody? And then who should be paying for the additional price that's needed to make it happen?
Because this is the $100 million question, and you can have two different philosophies. The first is that there should be transparency in the supply chain, and the customer can choose, and the sustainability attributes, because they typically come with higher efforts, would have a higher price. Now, I did change my view on this, and I'm starting to be a fan on the second option, which is that the sustainably produced food should be the cheaper option and the better option, because it will make the choice by the consumer so much easier. Because we have seen it from markets, observing markets, organic agriculture is probably in some areas at the limits, and to finding the clients and the willingness to pay. You will also not be able to scale this, even the current inflation and food price increases, as a solution. So the reward for the effort and the incentive to do the right thing must come earlier in the production chain, either in Europe for a restructuring of the subsidy system for the farmer, and then by really also the value chain efforts of having this level playing field in minimum standards, because as soon as you get away with more non-sustainable production efforts, which would lead to cheaper options, then it's still always the sneaky way out. So maybe I stop here, Tiffany. That was short,
yes,
where I'm in my thinking today,
Yeah, thanks, Petra. So indeed, whether it's a subsidy for the good or tax for the bad, you will need a standard that is transparent for everybody to understand, that cuts off if you are exceeding the standard, you are rewarded or punished the other way around. But that means there will need to be a universal standard, right, for all sectors. Hans, what do you think about this question also for what the Petra is mentioning?
I hope there will be coming one standard, but I'm not. I will think that it will be for more than 20 years, because now our company has 14 certified standards to be in the market, and the question became we better price. No, we became no better price, but it is the conditia sine qua non. There is no sales. Dat is een beetje Latijns. If you do not, you work good for the consumer, they will forget you. or forgot you. So yeah, we try to be in the front, and that they know who we are. But if you now in this moment to the retailers, let us say in Europe, all Europe, there are 25 or 30 big players. All of them have their own standard now, and we have to cover all of them, all questions. And if you see now the due diligence law and what is coming in Europe, I hope that coming one, so it will save a lot of cost, but for sure some certified offices will not survive in the business model. So they are against. They fight for their own model. But that's a personal opinion, but we try to do in the front, and we try to do for every retailer what he wants to sell. But the condition is that he tell it to his consumers, and that is the missing link till now.
Thanks, Frans. So indeed, time is the essence here. I think in the sector, there's a, let's say, universal acceptance that eventually there need to be a homogenization of standards, need to have transparency. But what people or the sector do not necessarily agree on is the speed that need to happen quick. But are we talking about 3 years, 5 years, 20 years? And given the challenge we face today, we do need to speed up. So the question is, how do you speed up a roadmap based on all the existing effort, tools, methodology, databases that need to link together? We have some comments we can come back to later. So Hans, with that question, you can maybe continue with your thoughts on this topic. What's the roadmap forward?
Yeah, what do you want? Do you first want to go to the poll, or do you want to have?
We can
answer?
show the poll after you give your thoughts.
Oh, okay, good. Now then I'll go forward with my presentation. If it's going to, yeah, okay. Where I? Yeah. So what is happening now? And I show you 3 slides or 4 slides which are related to activities we are involved in, and because the thing is that on one hand there's indeed standardization, but on the other hand a lot of industries are setting this up company by company, basically. So not the systems as such, but the assessment on how to improve. But basically, this is an example we did for a bigger European retail company, and they wanted to know. It's quite recent. They want to know how can we improve the impact of the produce that we sell, basically animal products and plant-based products. And this is a part of the assessment we did for the greenhouse gas the carbon footprint of pork. How can you reduce, basically? This is the way how I give this as an example of how industries, how companies are now busy with the question on how to improve performance on a product level. So what do? They start with having insight in the baseline impact of in this case pork. So amount of an average pork product as sold in the supermarket, and then you can see how of course supermarkets, but also the Unilevers in the world and all the big producers. They're going to set targets, 30, 40, 50% reduction of climate impact in the coming 10 years or something like that. Is that realistic, and how can I get there, basically? And where is the contribution in the value chain, and how can I affect the impact, basically? And this is then an example how that can look like. So you have this pork baseline, and here you have the potential in what you can now reasonably get, and these are basically the steps that you can take from A to B, from baseline to potential. So that is in feed production, you can already improve by improving nitrogen efficiency in crop production by using better fertilizer products, by improving feed composition. This is also an important one, having feed that doesn't cause any land conversion, and in that way also do not cause climate impact related to land conversion, improving the feed conversion in the pig systems, improving the manure management systems using renewable energy and hybrid products. There are more, but this was a selection, and this already gave around 60% reduction. So the potential is there, and the industries, retail is looking at the potential, is analyzing this potential, and will act on this potential. They will start having conversations with parties in the supply chain. Okay, I know I can get there. I want you to help me, basically. That is what is happening now. And of course, what is also happening is that, and that is going more or less in parallel, that if party A wants to communicate the improvements and the impact, they want to do this in a standardized way. So that will again being an incentive to go to this next level of standardization. Yeah, and why is it not moving now? Okay, but then national policies. So climate impact reduction at the national level, which is basically the main mechanism now to get to reduction of climate impact, works completely different. So that's not so interested in all these interrelations in the value chain and how you can make products better. No, it's all about basically achieving reductions per sector of emissions that are actually happening in that sector without any interconnection with other sectors. So it's completely not this, but it is going to focus on, okay, what's happening at the dairy farm and how can we reduce enteric methane emissions, or if you look at the pig farm, it's about methane emissions of the manure management systems. But it is not about thinking, how can I reduce the feed conversion rate, or how can I do all the other actions, basically, that were in the waterfall diagram that I just showed. So I try to visualize that like this. And this is also coming from a project that we do together with Wageningen University. And it's really about how can you try to interlink basically the policy perspective and the food value chain perspective that's coming from food printing in industry, basically. A country has to report on certain, let's say, emission category sectors. So if you have a national inventory report about climate impact, and in this national inventory report, you do this every year as a country, showing your progress in different sectors. So these sectors are, let's say, reported on. So it's about energy, industrial processes, agriculture, land use and land use change, and forestry, waste, and it's about transportation, which is not in this graph, by the way. So from a Dutch perspective, basically, if you look at the pigs, there's only focus on the manure management part at pig farming, and that contribution of the total impact of pig production in the Netherlands is around 2.0 megatons. It's a bit lower because this is a part of this, because this also holds some other direct production of farming of feed in the Netherlands that is here connected to the pig. So, but okay, let's take the 2.0. But the overall impact of the pig farming production chain in the Netherlands, and if you also look to all the interconnections in the Netherlands, but also outside the Netherlands in the EU or the rest of the world, is around 8. Industry sectors and footprinting initiatives and improving the value chain is focusing on the 8. And it's not bothering basically about where these emissions take place. They want to reduce the 8 megatons basically related to pig farming. Dutch policy is looking at a fraction of the 2 when it's about related to pig farming. Then you can come into, let's say, the situation where from a Dutch policy, and although it's not only related to of course the greenhouse gas emissions, but that the greenhouse gas emissions of the pig farming operation connected to manure management are used as an argument about scaling of the pig industry in the Netherlands, which is from the perspective of the total impact of pig farming, totally not so relevant, basically, because here the perspective and here the main question is, can you produce pigs in a way that is most efficient? Because anyhow, we are producing pigs, quite some pigs for export. But then the question is basically, is your production system the most efficient production system per unit of product? While from a policy perspective, that is totally not a relevant question. And there I see a complete mismatch between the efforts and the targeting of efforts on an industry level, and basically how the policy, how national policies approach industry sectors to cope with a reduction of climate impact. Okay, but there is a little bit of recognition that a connection might be interesting. So if you look in the Dutch Klimaatakkoord, then there are some, let's say, targets or some efforts mentioned that needs to be realized in 2025. And that is basically if methodology is available coming from the European PEF context, or the Product Environmental Footprint Category Rules. If that is good enough, the sector should start being transparent on carbon footprinting. They should do carbon footprinting. So the sector, I mean, food production and food retail in the Netherlands. So there's a start of recognition that this other perspective of looking at the impact on a product level is also important. The whole thing that is missing, though, is how do you connect this to any incentives to the sector to improve them? So, okay, recognition to start monitoring and to start showing that you improve. So the businesses will make carbon footprint of the products publicly available and will systematically lower the carbon footprint of the production chains. Explain your measures. This is, by the way, not a complete text. It's a summary. But where are the incentives here? There's nothing mentioned about it. But anyhow, I think it's important to go this road and, of course, to work on the policy incentives. And I think this European context is really important. So basically, the Dutch government is saying, okay, on a European level, we expect that they are ready in 2025 and that there is, let's say, full coverage of the methodologies, standards for doing footprinting on product level for product groups. Now, I think we really should stress this and try to push on this, that this happens, that really in 2025, there are standards available for all product categories which are sufficiently consistent, because you want to inform the consumer about, and not only the consumer, but every stakeholder about impact of environmental footprints and carbon footprints in a consistent way. Now there is still a little bit of let's say, room to fill things in by sector why there is not full consistency. So that's a worry from my side. But I would be really glad if the European Commission and countries would really push on having a complete set of standards for all food products, basically. Then the second thing, which is really essential, yeah, okay, fine that you have that, fine that you stress that you need to report and show your improvements, but also think as from a policy level on how you can incentivize this. So how to reward basically if you improve your performance on climate impact per product unit level. And then the next point, if you have this in place, how do you connect your country policy activities with this overall footprinting per product, per business activities? Maybe if that would work on an international university scale well, and there's really a movement into the direction of going to better performance per product level, maybe we should reconsider how to make greenhouse gas policies and how to adapt to this more international way of thinking. But okay, we're not there yet, so I wouldn't say that we should stop with national policies on climate impact, but I think we should anticipate also at a policy level how you can connect to this more international system of footprinting that is rolled out through sectors by big parties on the European, on an international level, how to connect to that and how to create synergies, basically. That's my presentation.
Thanks, Hans. So 3 years, actually, that's less than 3 years, 2022 now. So 2025, many things has to happen. Indeed, also in our previous sessions that we talked about, for example, the goodness paradox, when there are so many indicators and all the goodness domains consumers want to achieve, but then in the end, they start becoming very confusing and doesn't say anything anymore when you try to answer all categories. So that one clear direction, for example, comes down to is, for example, have very clear and simplified methodology on, for example, carbon footprinting and reporting. And that's what at least one area with the biggest impact that can cover representing wider variety of environmental impact. And from what you're describing, actually, the methodologies and data and tools are well developed, and what's needed is to connect them. So on our panel today, we have a number of big players. Again, Petra, I see you switch on your video, so I'd like to also ask you to comment on this Hans' presentation of having this minimum standard, especially working with the big players like yourself, to connect the different systems. Because also earlier in our session, we had the Cargill also talking about the GNLI database for feedstocks. But outside the grain sector, for example, in the immediate downstream of the egg industry, they have completely no knowledge about such system is in place or can be used into their system. So that's certainly lacks a lot of this connecting or interoperability topic. We have also a comment from in our audience. I'll invite also for discussion. So Petra.
Thanks, Stephanie. And when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions or avoided emissions, I'm pretty confident because there is the initiative of the European Commission to establish a carbon market in agriculture. And there are standards available like Vera, which can be used and can be applied. So that's for me probably doable in the next 3 years. Where we have more question marks is impact on, and in the beginning we also talked about biodiversity, right? Mm-hmm. So biodiversity impact or soil health. So there we are not there yet that we have the measurements ready, and so this will be much tougher. But I also believe once we get a greenhouse gas standard, and the carbon market in place. This will probably pull also the other areas to be developed and will be the front runner in a way.
Thanks, Petra. I think that indeed to first start on one sector that, set up at least the model of cooperating and sharing data, and that can be trickled down to other sectors. So Bianca, let's see the poll question from earlier. What does our participant think about the perspective? Okay, we have a majority of participants do think there will be a universal standard needed in the next 5 years. So well formed, consistent with what Hans was talking about. We have a number of questions. We can now open up for more discussions. We have, I don't know if I pronounce your name right, Alma de la Rue.
Ik het is de Franse naam, Guillaume heet ik, maar dat maakt niet uit.
Okay.
Ik ben gewend aan alles, dus.
If you can switch on your video, can also indeed join the discussion. Your microphone is switched off, so can you tell us who are you and where are you calling from?
Yes, so I'm calling from Amsterdam. I'm in between jobs after many years at the Rainforest Alliance, standard setter in sustainability. And looking at the question, a universal standard, I do think it's the holy grail, but is it realistic? There are so many factors coming into play into production of food, where a measure that works somewhere would be completely different in another region, another climate, another soil type, another culture, farming system. So I think you would end up with many custom guidances to cope with the variety of production of one same food crop or meat or whatever. And in that sense, that would become very hard to have comparable data with one standard, let alone managing all the translations and everything. It's more a practical aspect. I think it would be very hard to find methodologies that work worldwide.
Want to respond to that, Hans?
Yeah, I think for certain impacts that is true. I think for greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprints, we can, for a big part of all the emissions, we can calculate as well, and it's also really a global impact. So it's less related to local situations. But you can also connect this to the question, okay, where do you want to make what type of decisions with the granularity of information that you have, and certain things you need to manage local, basically. So then it is okay that then the information is also, let's say, the data and the metrics that you use are also connecting best to the local situation, to the local measures that you can take. So the evaluation can then be really more local. But there are themes, and really climate impact is one of them that you can measure with global metrics, and also can manage, and you should manage basically also on a global level. And the comparity is then also and there's a whole range in between. So I agree with you. There's metrics and impacts that are really complex, or impacts that can be really complex, and that you have to adapt your metrics. But that doesn't mean that you have to wait for, let's say, that this complete system is available for every potential situation.
Of course, I agree with that last part as well. And yeah, for climate, it's easier than looking at for water, biodiversity. These are much more complex aspects to measure. And my second point was also about coming back of Mr. Kraper on the flowers, saying yes, 14 standards. From experience from the Rainforest Alliance, we know other, like fair trade, organic, there's a lot of similarities between the standards, which means there's overlap basically. But anyway, those overlapping parts are audited 3 times. by 3 different auditors, or it could happen once with an auditor for a combined audit. But what I'm saying here is that there's ways of sharing data across standards, or there could be ways that would make the whole data collection and administrative hassle for manufacturers, food companies, much easier without compromising the actual quality. Think of, I know there's big hype and pros and cons, but an example of it could be blockchain to share things anonymously. The data is validated, and then it can be used by third parties, stuff like that. Or there's companies like SourceMap, SupplyShift to provide sort of integrated collaborative data sharing. When if a company has been audited, it's in the supply chain of one manufacturer. If another brand uses the manufacturer, the data is already there. It doesn't have to redo it all the time and reinvent the wheel all the time. So I think that's it just looks to me as a more realistic short-term solution. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have a bigger, longer-term solution, of course.
Yeah, if I may, quick reaction. I totally agree with that, and that's so. And I see also this development more or less autonomously, that there will be more and more service providers focusing on managing data at farm level and also in the further processing, basically, so that you have one system in place that collects and generates all the information that you need for the different stakeholders around you, basically. And that's the reason, for instance, that we at Blonk didn't want to come with another cool farm tool or another solution that does the calculations. Our strategy is much more like, okay, connecting with APIs. So we know an essential part on how to do calculations, and we want to cooperate with the other data systems or information that is already in place, or whatever that is already organized, and add this information, enrich it by connecting basically platforms where different parts of the calculations are done, basically. And I think that is the way forward. There will not be one overarching single system capturing everything, basically. That's an illusion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hans. Yes, indeed, that's a question. Actually, much of focus in our series about the different certification bodies, how to connect. So a number of the big players like Global Gap, GS1, they're also developing efforts on apps to interconnect data. So that's a field that will need to, and it's happening a lot, things to connect different standard setters. We have also a question from Sarah. Sarah, would you like to turn on your camera and microphone to introduce yourself and a question?
Yes, I can do so. Yeah, well, I'm working at Donausoja, and we already cooperate with Blonk as well as with other institutes on calculating the carbon footprints. And yeah, it's obvious that it's quite a lot of work behind every product that we calculate. And I wonder, like, because so many agree that, and I also agree that it needs a standard, and like maybe in future that also the products have to have a carbon footprinting, and make this information available also for their customers. But I think it's just so much effort behind every calculation of every product. So I wonder if there is, like, with smart farming or smart production, like as I said, we work with soybeans, that like when the soybeans come into the production site, that it's already measured how high the how humid the beans are, and if this can be connected somehow to a kind of computer system where, this can be calculated faster than a research institute takes.
Yeah, that's the future, basically. if I may answer, that is. We are now in a phase that everybody is. A lot of stakeholders are now figuring out what is needed to do the calculations. But if you know that, then the next step is basically, how can I do this in a smarter way, and how can I connect this to information flows that are already there and being collected. It's a lot about connecting the dots basically. I totally agree. So that and that's essential, because and then also reflect on our business. Our business was in the past doing quite a lot of one-off environmental footprint calculations, LCAs. We still do for quite some companies that are at the beginning of the process, but we also see that this environmental footprint monitoring, reporting will become a continuous process connected to the accountancy or the bookkeeping that is already there at the company, or the management systems that are already in place to steer processes. So I think that there is future, and you're absolutely right. We should try to reduce basically the time and costs for the baseline assessment dramatically, so that the information is already available or easily available, and then think from there, because in the end it is all about defining how to improve your performance and what you can do to realize that.
Thanks, Hans. Two more comments. We start with Luis Alejandro. You can introduce yourself and your comment.
Yeah, my name is Luis Alejandro also. I recently graduated from Wageningen University. Did my master's on environmental sciences. And yeah, I think in the future, 5 years, well, 3 now, I think that it's feasible that we're going to have a calculator that's going to bring us an approximation of the multiple LCAs around the world, which maybe is not going to be very, the information that's going to bring, it's going to be very realistic to the local standards. But as I said, it's going to be an approximation that we're going to use for the decision making. That's going to be what we need to react to now, and which steps we need to follow on improving the environment and having less environmental pollution.
Congratulations on your graduation. So are you working on topics, or a company that's developing on the tool or methodology?
Not now, but I'm very interested to work in this field.
Hans already mentioned they have such a problem finding young talent, so connected.
Might be an opportunity then.
Yeah, so have the contact. You want to respond to Luis already, or you want to have a separate talk? Well, behind me, they have the new poster for our next session. It will be with DSM on animal feed, together with Wilbur Hilkens on telling the stories. Basically, we have the data, have the consumers, retail, and then how do we indeed come to the point of the question of incentivize the market. And I'd like to ask Dick, maybe you can give a conclusion remark or question.
Oh, I don't want to add anything. I think it was a wonderful conference, Hans. I'd like to thank you a lot for pointing out this mismatch, because it's really a mismatch, and you show that it is dramatic. And what I found very interesting in this discussion is that we need to bring together people who know the actual biology, who know what standard setting is, and who know what data integration is and data collecting on just on a software level and a sensoring level. And I think we need to create a kind of think tank to make the roadmap Tiffany is always after. And that came out in this conference beautifully. So thank you, and thank you all for contributing.
So thank you, everybody, for great discussion and participation. I hope to see you next time in a month.